Theft. The security camera had captured everything. The elderly man had been caught red-handed, and Sarah had only one button at her disposal, the alarm button. But instead of pressing that button, what she did that night rewrote not only an old man's fate, but her own destiny as well. Sarah Hartwell was 23 years old and had been working at Megamart in Greenfield for 3 years. She preferred the night shift because she needed to attend nursing school during the day. After losing her mother to cancer, her father Mark Hartwell had suffered a heart attack and had been bedridden for 2 years, requiring full-time care. Sarah carried both her own future and her father's medical expenses on her shoulders. That November night was like any other. At 11:30 p.m., as the store was preparing to close, the last customers were finishing their shopping. Sarah sat at the register, glancing over her anatomy assignment that was due the next morning. Working under fluorescent lights strained her eyes, but she had no other choice. The medications her father needed cost $400 a month, and insurance only covered half of that. The security cameras in the store monitored every corner. Sarah had seen them so many times that she barely noticed them anymore. But that night, the footage captured by the camera on the left side would become a turning point in her life. Sarah hadn't paid attention to the elderly man as he wandered the aisles. He appeared to be in his 70s, wearing a worn coat and old shoes. The way he moved, the slump of his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes. These were familiar to Sarah. She had seen elderly people like this in her own neighborhood, in her own apartment building. People who couldn't make ends meet on their retirement pensions, who were too proud to ask for help. The man stood for a long time in the bread aisle. He held a small list in his hand: bread, milk, eggs. He was trying to choose the cheapest brands. Sarah could see him carefully examining price tags, doing calculations in his head. Finally, he picked up a loaf of bread and put it in his basket. But then he paused, took the bread back into his hands, and looked at the price again. $2.99. Sarah had witnessed these scenes before. Customers whose families were struggling would come in, pick up their necessities, but sometimes at the register they would sheepishly return some items. "Actually, I don't need this," they would say, but Sarah always detected the sadness in their voices. The elderly man moved to the dairy section. He selected the cheapest milk, then went to the egg section. There too, he chose the most affordable option. The 3 items in his basket totaled $8.47. Sarah calculated this mentally because she had sold these same products dozens of times. 11:40 p.m. The man approached the register. Sarah was cleaning her glasses at the time and got up to man the cash register. "Good evening," she said with a smile. The man nodded but didn't make eye contact. He placed his basket on the counter. That's when it happened. As Sarah was scanning the bread with the barcode reader, the man quickly slipped the milk carton into the inside pocket of his coat. The movement was so swift and practiced that Sarah's heart began to race. The man had obviously done this before. The security camera had recorded everything. Sarah looked up at the camera. Its red light was blinking, still recording. The alarm button was to Sarah's left, within arm's reach. All she had to do was press one button. Security would come, the man would be caught, and the police would be notified. But Sarah noticed something. The man's hands were trembling. Not just from old age, but from fear. There was fear of being caught in his eyes, but also desperation. This wasn't a criminal. This was someone in desperate need of help. Sarah's mind raced. Bread $2.99, eggs $3.48. Total $6.47. The milk was $2. If she didn't press the alarm button, the man would pay for what was scanned and would have stolen the milk. If she pressed it, the man's life would be ruined. He would be arrested for theft, get a criminal record, and could lose his home if he had one. Total is $6.47, Sarah said slowly. The man's eyes looked at her in surprise. Sarah had ignored the milk carton, calculating only the items in the basket. The man pulled out a crumpled $10 bill from his pocket. So he had money, but apparently not enough for the milk. Sarah took the money, gave him his change, and handed him the receipt. "Thank you," the man said in a low voice. There was gratitude in his voice, but also shame. Sarah just smiled as the man walked toward the door. Sarah looked at her screen. The camera recordings were there. What would happen if her manager reviewed them the next day? She could lose her job. Where would the money for her father's medications come from? How would school expenses be paid? But in that moment, Sarah had made a decision. She wouldn't press the alarm button. And this decision would trigger a chain reaction that would change her life 6 months later. The following days were quite tense for Sarah. She expected to be called to manager Andrew Milstein's office at any moment. Security camera footage was routinely reviewed, and if suspicious situations were detected, employees were questioned. But days passed and nothing happened. Sarah didn't see the elderly man again. She found herself thinking, I hope he's okay, but she couldn't share that night's events with anyone. Neither her friends nor her father knew. This was her secret, and this secret was becoming increasingly heavy. 3 weeks later, while Sarah was on the night shift again, she saw a familiar figure. The elderly man had returned. This time he was different. His posture was more upright. There was a slight smile on his face. He followed the same bread, milk, eggs route, but this time he added a can of soup to his basket. When he came to the register, he looked into Sarah's eyes. "Hello," he said quietly. Sarah replied, "Good evening." This time the man didn't steal anything. He paid for all his items. But as he was leaving, he stopped and turned to Sarah. "That night," the man said. His voice seemed to crack. "Thank you." Sarah nodded. It was nothing. After the man left, Sarah's heart was beating fast. The man knew. He knew that Sarah had protected him. And now he had come back and shopped honestly. 2 months passed. The man began coming regularly. Every Thursday night, half an hour before the store closed. The same products every time: bread, milk, eggs. Sometimes he would add canned soup or cheap pasta. His conversations with Sarah were brief, but he thanked her every time. On his 4th visit, the man spoke more openly. "My name is Henry," he said. "Henry Blackwood." "I'm Sarah," Sarah said. "Sarah Hartwell." "Beautiful name," Henry said. "I heard you're studying nursing. A very noble profession." Sarah was surprised. "How do you know?" "I saw textbooks at your register. Anatomy, nursing fundamentals. I had read those books too." "Are you a nurse too?" Henry smiled. "I was a doctor. I'm retired." Sarah was confused. Why would a man who was a doctor need to shoplift? Henry seemed to read her thoughts and explained. "My retirement pension is very small. After my wife passed away, house expenses, medications. Sometimes it's hard to make ends meet. That night I really had no money. I had bought bread and eggs with my last $20. I didn't have money left for milk, but I really needed it. I have to take my medications with milk." Sarah's eyes welled up. "I wish I had known. I could have helped." "You already helped," Henry said. "That night you could have pressed the alarm button. You could have ruined my life. But you didn't. And that changed everything for me." That night, after Henry left, Sarah thought for a long time. How small acts of kindness in life could lead to big impacts. Her decision that night hadn't just saved Henry, it had also given him hope. But Sarah didn't yet know that Henry's story ran much deeper. And the truth she would learn 6 months later would completely change her life. In his 5th visit, Henry stopped as he was leaving the register. He pulled out a small card from his pocket and handed it to Sarah. "This is the card from my old clinic," he said. "I'm not working anymore, but sometimes I review my old patient files. If there's anything I can do to help your father." Sarah looked at the card. It read, "Dr. Henry Blackwood, cardiology specialist." Sarah's heart stopped. "Are you a cardiologist?" "I worked for 42 years. Before retiring, I was one of the best heart doctors in the city. You mentioned your father had a heart attack. Maybe I could look at his files." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Her small act of kindness that night was now coming back to her. But she didn't yet know this was just the beginning. Sarah, who researched Henry Blackwood's medical background, was shocked by the facts she encountered. This man wasn't just a cardiologist. He was the former chief of medicine at Greenfield Memorial Hospital. In his 40-year career, he had treated thousands of patients, written dozens of medical articles, and trained young doctors. After retirement, he had spent most of his savings on his wife Margaret's cancer treatment, and after his wife's death, he had struggled to prevent his house from being foreclosed by the bank. When Sarah showed her father's files to Henry, the elderly doctor began examining them with a serious expression. Mark Hartwell's treatment after his heart attack, the medications he was taking, the doctors following up. Henry carefully reviewed every detail. "Your father's condition is more serious than I thought," Henry said in a grave voice. "There's significant damage to the heart muscle, and the medications he's currently taking aren't quite appropriate. Also, the risk of vascular blockage is very high." Sarah's heart sank. "What can we do?" "First, we need to adjust the medication dosages. Then regular checkups and maybe surgery. But these are expensive treatments." Sarah bowed her head. "I don't know how I'll afford it. We're already in debt." Henry remained silent for a long time. Then he looked at Sarah. "The mercy you showed me that night, now it's time for it to return. I will treat your father. Free of charge." Sarah couldn't believe it. "But how?" "Your hospital equipment. My connections at the old hospital are still strong. Director Dr. Angela Morrison used to be my assistant. I'll explain the situation to her. We'll prepare a special treatment program for your father." And indeed, it happened. Dr. Morrison didn't refuse Henry's request. A comprehensive heart treatment program was started for Mark Hartwell. Medications were provided free of charge, checkups were done regularly. Within 3 months, significant improvements were seen in Mark's health. But Henry's surprise for Sarah wasn't limited to this point. One Friday evening, while Sarah was working at the register, Henry came. This time he didn't have a shopping basket in his hand. He only had a large envelope. "Sarah," he said in a serious voice, "there's something I need to talk to you about." Sarah closed the register and went aside with Henry. "What's in this envelope?" Sarah asked. "When my wife Margaret died, she had left me a letter. In that letter, she wrote that if someone in life showed me kindness, I should return that kindness tenfold. You will now receive the kindness you showed me that night, returned tenfold." When Sarah opened the envelope, what came out nearly made her faint. A document providing full scholarship to nursing school, a health insurance policy covering all of her father's treatment costs, and a bank check for $50,000. This is too much," Sarah said, trembling. "I can't accept it." "You will accept it," Henry said firmly. "Because this isn't just money. This is hope. You gave me hope that night. Now I'm giving it to you." "But where did you get the money?" Henry smiled. "I had never spent my wife's life insurance money, because I didn't think I deserved it. But you reminded me that I was worthy. You gave me back my humanity." Sarah went home crying that night. When her father met her, she tried to explain the situation, but words weren't enough. Her small act of kindness that night had now completely changed their lives. But the story wasn't over yet. Henry's biggest surprise for Sarah would come 6 months later. 6 months later, Sarah's life had completely changed. She was attending nursing school on full scholarship, her father was getting better every day under Dr. Henry Blackwood's treatment, and their financial troubles had ended. She no longer had to work at Megamart, but she went there once a week to maintain her friendship with Henry. That cold April morning when Sarah's door was knocked, what she saw when she opened it both surprised and worried her. Henry was there, but with 3 other people: Greenfield Memorial Hospital Director Dr. Angela Morrison, Nursing Faculty Dean Professor Elizabeth Caro, and a smartly dressed middle-aged woman she didn't recognize. "Sarah," Henry said with a happy smile, "it's time to present you with the final surprise." When they came inside, Henry began to speak. "You've seen how the kindness you showed in the past 6 months created change. But I've shared your story with others too. When Dr. Morrison heard your story, she was very impressed." Dr. Morrison stepped forward. "Sarah, your behavior that night gave hope not only to Henry but to the entire community. That's why we have a special offer for you." Professor Caro continued. "After you complete your nursing education, a special position awaits you at Greenfield Memorial. You'll be the coordinator of the Compassion and Kindness program we'll establish under Henry's consultancy." Sarah looked in amazement. "What kind of program is this?" The elegantly dressed woman beside them stepped forward. "I'm Margaret Thompson, president of the Greenfield Community Foundation. When I heard Henry's story, we created a fund to help former healthcare workers in difficult situations like him. You'll be the face of this program." Henry added, "That night you didn't just save an elderly man from theft charges, Sarah. You proved that humanity still exists. And now we're ready to spread this kindness to thousands of people. Dr. Morrison pulled out a file. Here's the official offer. After you get your nursing diploma, you'll start this program with a salary of $75,000 per year. You'll also be able to pursue a master's degree in social work under Henry's guidance. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. I just did what was right. That's exactly why, Henry said. You did what was right, without thinking. And now this kindness will spread in waves. Margaret Thompson added, already 50 families have started benefiting from this program. By the time you graduate, this number will exceed 200. That day was one of the most beautiful days of Sarah's life. But in the evening, when she was alone with Henry, the elderly doctor told her his final secret too. Sarah, I apologize for not telling you that I wasn't testing you that night, Henry said quietly. Testing? I hadn't stolen that milk. I had put it in my pocket, but I was going to take it out and pay for it when I came to the register. But when you were watching me, I wondered whether you would press the alarm button or not. And you protected me, without even knowing I was innocent. Sarah was shocked. So you genuinely did a good deed with a pure heart, without expecting any benefit, without expecting any return. And this was the most beautiful example of humanity I had seen in my 40-year medical career. That night as Sarah went to bed, she thought, life sometimes came in the most unexpected ways. Her small act of kindness that night would change the lives of not only Henry but hundreds of people. And best of all, this story was just beginning. 6 months later, when Sarah graduated, there were 500 people at the opening ceremony of the program held at Greenfield Memorial Hospital. The small act of kindness that night had now become a movement. And Sarah had now hung on her office wall the small note she always carried while working at the register. You don't need to do big things to do good. Sometimes just not pressing the alarm button is enough.